Let's talk about where things stand right now. Whenever we talk about Hirschbach or whenever Hirschbach comes up today, drivers aren't saying really good things. Most of what we're hearing is a ton of frustration. And when someone tries to defend the company, the only thing they can point to is the past. They used to be a good company a long time ago. Well, this is 2025 getting ready to be 2026. So today we're not here for opinions. What we're here for is the math. Big Rig Nation exists for one reason. We don't sell lease programs. We don't take money from carriers. Drivers come to us if they need help, and we get them in with good companies that's in our group. Does this actually work consistently? Well, that question matters because trucking isn't always judged by a good week. The way it should be judged is what happens over time. Hirschbach didn't start as a corporate giant. It started in 1935 with just one truck hauling Midwest produce, and they were family run. For decades, Hirschbach built a reputation for being professional, predictable, and extremely reliable. That reputation was earned. But in 2001, the leadership completely changed. And over the next 2 decades, Hirschbach scaled aggressively like a lot of these companies. But today it's a national carrier generating over $1 billion a year. By business standards, that's success. But business success doesn't always equal driver profitability. Over time, the conversation changed. Drivers stopped saying, "This is a good place to build," and started saying, "It's not the same company anymore." Something has changed inside the organization. I didn't expect this. When we hear that consistently, we don't argue online. This is when we start asking for paperwork. As you see these settlements flipping on the screen behind me, one of the things that stood out the most was we reviewed multiple weeks where drivers were getting 2,200 miles, 2,500 miles, almost 3,000 miles. The gross pay was typically between 2,600 and up to $3,400. On paper, it sounds workable, but that's where a lot of drivers get convinced. But now let's look at what comes out every single week when you're working there. Let me be clear about something. I'm not saying every driver has the same week. I'm not saying nobody ever doesn't make a good check. But what I am saying is this: based on the Hirschbach lease settlements we reviewed, the average week does not produce a strong net for the amount of work and the amount of risk that's involved. This is not an opinion. This is a math conclusion that we have came to. Across multiple settlements, the fixed costs are remarkably consistent. $825 for your truck payment. There was $199 for loss damage waiver, about $26 for occupational accidental insurance, which you do need, but it's a weekly cost. It's still a little high. Fuel plan charges often between $280 and $420. Full service maintenance at roughly 10 cents per mile. That's about $190 to $275 per week. Okay, that's getting up there. Escrow pools around $50 to $75 weekly. You know, plus permits, scales, admin, and the insurance line items. Before the driver ever sees a dollar, between $1,800 to $2,400 is already gone. That's not one bag a week. That is the actual structure. And here's where the drivers really feel the squeeze. These examples come straight from their settlements. You see, one week a driver grossed 2,964. That's it came out, and his net came out to 1,083. Another one's came to 2,616, and that he had a $323 net. Another one was 3,476, and he had a 497 net. One shorter week ended at zero net with a balance rolling forward. That's not because the driver didn't work. That's because the cost structure eat their week alive. Now let's pause right here for just a second because this part really matters. This isn't just about Hirschbach, all right? This is about any lease model in the United States with these companies where you see fixed weekly costs that don't move when miles do. And if you're trying to understand how these numbers actually work before you sign anything, that's why this channel exists, okay? So make sure to subscribe so you can learn more, and we'll be right back. Now let's talk about what's called the carry forward trap. This is what we've called it. And this is for lease purchase guys, owner operators. And this is what really traps the drivers. You see, negative weeks don't reset. They go forward, they roll forward. So the next settlement starts partially spent before the driver ever turns a wheel. Drivers tell us the same thing over and over and over. I just couldn't catch up. I kept running harder, but I stayed behind. This is not motivation. This is math. Now, I just want to take 1 second to explain this to you. A lot of you are probably sitting here racking your brains out trying to figure out what these drivers are making per mile. Okay. Well, that's what's a little wild about all of this. What you're seeing here is lanes that are paying about $1 to $1.50 a mile to these lease drivers. And to be honest, the natural reaction, there's no way the freight itself is paying that little. And you're right. I assure you that it's not. That number is not their freight rate. Okay. That's the driver's credit rate that you see. In reality, refrigerated contract freight like this is usually paying the carrier well over $2 a mile, sometimes closer to $2.50 or more, depending on the lane, fuel surcharge. I've even seen three. The carrier negotiates that freight. The carrier controls the customer, and then the carrier decides how much of that gets passed down to that lease driver. So the freight isn't cheap, okay? The lease driver is just last in line to get his money. By the time the truck payment, the insurance, the maintenance, the fuel plans, the overhead, the protection, whatever's left is what the drivers run on. So that's why the gross looks horrible, because not because the lane doesn't pay, but because the structure strips the upside before the driver ever sees it. When people defend Hirschbach, they usually say they're a good company. But what they really mean is they used to be. That matters. It proves the industry can work. It proves drivers didn't suddenly forget how to run freight. It tells us the structure changed, not the people, okay? We're not attacking anyone that works in the company. This is why Big Rig Nation exists. We don't rely on opinions. What we rely on is volume. Yes, a few fake statements will always exist, but the math is always honest. When enough real settlements come in, the patterns emerge, and patterns don't lie, and this is how accountability works. Some drivers at Hersbach are still doing okay, and really that truly matters. But isolated success does not cancel out structural risk. And at Big Rig Nation, we analyze those systems. There's not exceptions. So this isn't about Hirschbach alone. It's about any model where fixed costs are locked in and revenue isn't. Recruiters sell potentials. Contracts create obligations. Settlements reveal reality. And if you want transparency, then you're in the right place. If you don't, nobody's forcing you to watch. Subscribe, because trucking doesn't need more promises. What it needs is accountability, and the drivers will always come first here.